Transit and transportation, infrastructure, the Green Belt, jobs, and auto insurance. Just a smattering of the issues faced by the 905. That, of course, is the region comprised of the municipalities surrounding Toronto. So joining us now to discuss these issues and more are Tracy MacCharles, Minister of Consumer Services and Liberal candidate for the riding of Pickering-Scarborough East. Mike Patrick, Progressive Conservative candidate for the riding of Durham. Jagmeet Singh, NDP candidate for the riding of Bramley, Gore, Malton. Peter Elgee, Green Party candidate for the riding of York, Simcoe. And our non-politician or wannabe politician at the table, Ashley Chinati, reporter with QP Briefing. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here as we get into the home stretch of this campaign. Okay, let's talk 905. I want to bring up a map of the region. It is very vast. It is very diverse. It surrounds Toronto on the east, west, and north sides. There are 25 ridings in the 905. And at the end of the last legislative session, the 40th Ontario Parliament, here was the seat count. The Liberals held 14, the Progressive Conservatives 10, and Jagmeet Singh, you were the lone NDP representative from the 905. Okay, so there it is, a region where you're all trying to win a seat come election day. Aside from not liking Toronto very much, what do most residents in the 905 have in common? Peter, let me begin with you.
Well, I think fundamentally what they all have in common is the environment, is the natural world that we share, right? It's the water table of Ontario, it's the forests of Ontario, it's the little prime farmland that we have in Ontario. It's basically the transition zone from urban through to rural in Ontario. And it's home of where we grow our food and we get our water and we have trees that provide oxygen for us.
Okay, Tracy, you have an interesting riding because it straddles the 416 and the 905, that most voters in the 905. Your riding, what does it share in common with the other ridings in the 905?
So my sense is that the issues are very similar to 406. It's how they play out. So transportation, infrastructure, healthcare, care for seniors, retirement security. I think everyone has the same top issues, but they play out differently in the 905 side of my riding, and I think in most 905 areas, because the amount of growth is different. They're not as mature communities in terms of infrastructure. Some areas like Pickering that I represent is going to double in size when Seton lands come into play. So that brings up a whole host of issues and opportunities alone in Pickering, because it will be the largest urban development in the 905 that we'll see. So I think the issues are the same, but they just play out differently because of geography, because of maturity of communities.
Mike, your riding is the furthest east in the 905,
That's correct,
right? Okay,
yes.
so what do your residents in your riding concerns, what do they have in common with, say, Jagmeet's riding, which is a far distance from yours?
I wouldn't think we'd have much in common, to be honest. I mean, Durham is a combination of suburban and rural, and it's a huge riding. It is the largest 905 riding in the GTA. You know, it includes Clarington, Scugog, Uxbridge. So in the south, we have Clarington, which is quite suburban. We have the Darlington nuclear plant down there as a big employer. And then we get north into Port Perry and Uxbridge. It's very, very rural up there. They all have different needs. So when I'm out knocking on doors, I'm hearing a lot of different priorities. Transit, you know, for our riding is GO Transit. You know, it's not subways and LRTs. You know, so those are the kinds of issues that I'm hearing at the doors. You know, transportation gridlock for us involves things like extension of Highway 407 all the way to 115/35. Those are the kind of issues I hear at the doors.
Okay, Jagmeet, does that sound familiar? These kinds of things you're hearing?
You know, I like the way Tracy framed it. In a lot of ways, I think everyone has very similar issues. End of the day, and I think the way they play out, maybe the geography influences it, but I think top of mind issues, people are all concerned about good jobs. People want to make sure that there's a good future for their kids. People want to make sure that there's a way to get around. And that may be different because a community is developing in a different way, but they want to be able to get around. So those basic ideas, I think, are very similar, but the way they play out. So for example, for us as well as Peter, our concerns are GO Train as well. People in Brampton want to have access to Toronto. We actually like Toronto, but we want to have, Malton and Brampton. We want to have two-way all-day GO trains so we can get in and out of Toronto to work. We also are concerned with some things that are more specific to the suburbs. Auto insurance is a really big issue. It wasn't my personal, passion, but it turned out to be the #1 issue in my riding, and it turned out it was also a big issue in all of Brampton. So that's another cost of living issue.
Okay, we're going to talk about auto insurance in a little while. I want to be be very clear. Everyone here at the table likes the 416 and likes the 905. We are not going to pit ourselves against one another.
Well, it doesn't need to be the 905, 289, 647, 365 now.
That said, I am a declared 416er. I don't spend a lot of time in the 905. So teach me, what are the important differences that within the region that I need to understand as, say, a quote-unquote outsider? Let's begin with you, Mike. What do I need to understand about the 905?
About our area of the 905, you need to understand that getting into the city is very important for a lot of our people. As much as we don't want to be bedroom communities, an awful lot of our residents are commuters. And gridlock is a huge issue. And sitting in a car for an hour and a half to get into the city is a big issue with a lot of our people.
Okay, who else wants to hop in here? What don't I might not fully understand is
Well, that all of these areas were at one point rural. And the other issue is that none of these issues that we're going to talk about adhere to or respect electoral boundaries.
Okay.
So I think in my community, one of the interesting things is growth. So the Peel region, I grew up in Windsor. In Windsor, when my family first moved to Windsor back in the early 80s, population was about 200,000. Fast forward to today, again about 200,000. In that same time period, Brampton, Mississauga doubled in population. So before they were under, if you put them together, under 500,000, now well over 1 million. Huge growth. So that with growth has a lot of potential opportunities, but also a lot of obstacles you have to overcome. And when it comes to the transit, the reality is why auto insurance is such a big issue is because there isn't really a viable transit alternative for people. So to get to work, it's not because people, are choosing a car because it's a luxurious way to get around, and they scoff at public transit. It's just not an option. And if we had a better public transit system, maybe people would use it, but there's really not an option for people realistically to take transit to get to work. So driving is almost a necessity in a lot of the 905, particularly in Brampton.
All right, Ashley, dig in here. What don't we get about the 905? What do we really need to understand in order to understand the issues and the people of the 905?
Well, I think one of the big things that needs to be understood about the 905 is it isn't just Peel region. I think a lot of people, the mental image from outside of the province is Mississauga, Brampton is the 905, but as you can see, it's also the eastern side of Toronto. It's also the north of the 416. And I think the one thing that really does bring and bridge all those communities together is the transit and transportation issue. The fact that moving through this part of the province right now is so slow, whether you're doing it by car or even if you're trying to do it by transit to some of these areas. Because if you were to take a GO train and then the local transit bus and then probably have to walk from that stop, it's not easy to move right now from the 905 into the 416
and then you have to get on the TTC to get to your job,
exactly,
perhaps.
to the 905. So I think that really is the one key factor that links, although maybe not effectively right now.
Not in a physical way, but in an emotional, practical way.
So I have to agree with everyone that it's transit and the transit infrastructure that is a top of mind issue for 905. And there's two sides of it. One is dealing with the gridlock of getting in and out of Toronto for the people who do that. But then for developing communities to make sure there's solid transit and infrastructure within those communities so people can hopefully live closer to where they work. So it's not just about people working in Toronto. Things like the 407 East extension that I think Mike mentioned that we're building, is helping with that. The improved GO train service every 30 minutes, which we want to bring to every 15 minutes. One other example I'm very proud of, and Ashley talked about integration between the boundaries, is a thing called the Pulse Bus, which now takes students from Durham College in Oshawa along Highway 2 every 7.5 minutes in rush hour right into University of Toronto Scarborough campus in the Scarborough side of my riding. So that integration with other regions is so important, whether it's into Toronto, York region. I know there's other examples of that, but we need to think less about those barriers to transit between the regions and more cross-regional transit. And our plan is very significant in terms of the investment we're going to make outside of the GTA on
Okay,
transit.
we'll talk about let's stick with transit. We have heard from everybody that getting around the 905, but also from the 905 to the 416.
Yes.
Is challenging, if not problematic. Ashley, what are the state of the highways? You talked a little about transit infrastructure, but what about the highways in 905? Because that's where most people are on. They're driving their cars on highways.
The highways in the 905, well, there's a lot of promises about the highways in the 905. Extending the 427 up to the airport is a big one. Extending the 407 eastward would relieve a lot of pressure as well. But these are all pledges. Some of them have timelines. Some of them are in the environmental assessment stage, but none of them are actually currently being built. We did see the 410 extension recently completed, and that I have in-laws in the 905, so it makes it easier to drive there. So that one I know firsthand.
As long as we're working out for you there, yeah.
But there's been a lot of promises, but I think a lot of people there are wondering when they're actually going to see that built.
Okay, I want to get into, you can all get partisan now, because let's talk about what needs to happen in your ridings to get people moving. So Jagmeet, what do you need? What's the plan?
Sure, I think a two-prong approach. One of the things that Ashley just mentioned was the 427 extension. Right now, there's a big part of the community that really doesn't have access to a really good highway to get them into the city. And if 427 was extended, that would be a great kind of corridor. But more important than that would be the biggest issue, the top of mind issue in terms of transit. To get people off the roads would be a two-way all-day GO. I started taking the GO, and what happens is you get trapped. With the Bramley line, what happens is you have a window of opportunity in the morning, there's a big gap, and then a window of opportunity in the evening, and then it's over. And so if you miss that, you miss your way home. And that's a big deal. And if there was a two-way all-day GO, much like we have on the Lakeshore Corridor, it would really make a big difference. People could use it as, a way to get into the city to do some shopping, or a way to get into the city to watch a game, or to get into a meeting that you have to do with a client and then get back. Right now, once you get in on a GO train, you're stuck. So that would be a big issue, I think.
Okay, Mike, that's something that your leader, Tim Hudak, has talked about, that he wants to, in his plan, increase the number of trains running in GO. Would that help in your riding?
It absolutely would. But what I'm hearing when I talk to people in our riding is that for 10 years we've had lots of promises, and our people feel that Durham is always forgotten. It always seems that things happen out in the west and not at Durham. We were told that we'd have GO train service, all the way to Bowmanville years ago. Our local mayor said to me, recently, I thought we had that. I read that in the paper, didn't I? We do feel shortchanged. And Highway 407 all the way to Highway 115, 35, that was supposed to have been done under the flow agreement between Jim Flaherty and Greg Sabara. And there was $5 billion, committed to 5 capital projects. That was one of them. In those 5, and it never happened. So to us, the province took the $5 billion and ran with it, and we didn't get the 407.
I think it's a little more positive than that. When you talk about the 407, the work is underway. You can see the construction sites. The vendors have been selected for 407 East. That's going to, by the way, be in public hands and not, in a 99-year lease like we have on the west side of the 407. So we're going to control that. There's specific dates for Oshawa extension.
That's just Oshawa.
Hang on, it's 2017 for that, and 2020 for out to Peterborough. So that's fantastic. The 407. It's a huge thing. The GO train, we've had that progress of 30-minute GO trains on the Lakeshore line, and that in our plan would move to every 15 minutes. And when I look at Durham region, where Mike and I live, there's been $1 million invested in the 407 and $1.5 million in transit and infrastructure projects. Because we can talk about transit and transportation, but the roads and the bridges and all that help us commute within the region and to other regions is critical. So those investments are there, and some are in progress for sure. But $1 million on the 407, $1.5 additional million in Durham, and that, I think, helps people in Durham feel less like neglected cousins.
All right, Peter, what needs to... Oh, sorry, I'll get you to come in, Mike, and then I'll go to you, Peter. Go ahead.
Yeah, right now the plan, the money is there to get 407 as far as Harmony Road, which is Oshawa. And my understanding is that the only way it's coming into Durham is a bridge over the 401. And I understand that the Great Move Forward plan does not have money in it for that bridge. So we're very skeptical.
Okay. Peter, in York Simcoe, what do you need to get people moving?
Well, certainly the other parties are coming up with interesting solutions at the output end to try to patch together a paradigm that's broken. And with any paradigm shift, there is an initial confusion because people don't know what's going to replace it. So now we've got this society where people have moved into rural areas and out of the city, and we're still in the car and road paradigm that leaves us trapped where you spend 7 years of your life in gridlock and you don't even think about it, right? It's the boiling frog that you just, it almost becomes the norm. And so we can talk about trying to minimize it a bit, but that was the generation that citizens were willing to give up some money in order to build the infrastructure of the time. But what we all ought to be talking about is what's the future of transit? Like, it's never been easier to get around, but it's now building more roads just means bigger parking lots and longer commutes and encourages more people to drive. Premier Wynne has really seemed to put an effort into putting some money into serious transit thoughts. And it's a difficult thing, right? Because you've got the Conservative mayor of Toronto who's got the gravy train stopping in his office and has made it very difficult for things to be done.
Okay. You mentioned the big move. That, of course, is Metrolinx's plan to build transit. It essentially will mean that 905 transit needs to be put on hold while they deal with the 416. And it also means, at the same time, while you're waiting, that you have to subsidize the 416. Is it fair to expect that from 905ers, Jagmeet?
Well, I mean, one of the things we need to touch on just before we move into that exact topic is that the broken promises has to be looked at. The fact that we were promised an all-day go, we were promised a two-way all-day go into Brampton that would go all the way up into Orangeville. If that goodwill had been built, if the trust had been there that that promise had been fulfilled, it would make more sense to say, listen, we can put a hold on other expansions and we can work on easing some of the gridlock in Toronto, because it is a natural hub for the rest of the province, and investing in our capital would encourage growth and development in the city, which would also spill into the province. And I think there's merit to that and people understand that. But the broken trust, the fact that the Liberals promised to build that, or to make sure there was a two-way all-day go into Brampton and into Malton, not having that has broken a lot of trust. We are committing to having a two-way all-day go as the NDP. That's something we need to have. Then we can look at some of the priorities in Toronto, which is something we all, I think, agree on, that it's important to have.
Across the country, this is why politics is stuck, is because it's all about each party in every province where they're in power just criticizing and jumping all over the promises that they didn't make, when all of these things are being created in such a hostile environment that it's very difficult for parties to even have honest discussions and come up with proposals, because if there's anything that's weak about it, you can just bash it around for years and then nothing gets done. I mean, what's the future of transit to you? Is it roads? Is it more cars with fuel that is monopolizable and is unhealthy for us and is not renewable?
Peter, what I was speaking of was transit, actually. I don't know if you heard what I was saying. I was talking about GO trains, not about roads. And I think what's important is that if we want to build trust in the discussion, there needs to be some forethought before a promise is made. You can't just blindly make promises and then expect people to trust the government to make decisions.
But you're asking them to trust you again. And in other provinces, they're saying the same thing about your party.
Thoughtful decision making.
But that's where Metrolinx comes in, Jagmeet, as you know.
But the decisions can't be, you can't make a decision on the eve of an election and then break that promise. Those type of decision making is what I think people are concerned about.
But Metrolinx is the body that is doing the long-range regional planning. So a GO train to Bowmanville, for example, is in phase 2. Not everything can be done right away, but it's that body that everyone has input into to create that plan and to change it as we go. Otherwise, we get into a bun fight about who got what and who's not getting what. So that becomes a bit of the transit Bible, if you will. And can it change? Yes. Can it evolve? Yes. But that is the plan for regional transit growth. So we can shape it, we can change it.
I think the most interesting thing here is that every single party wants to do two-way all-day GO service on all the lines at some point, but they spend so much time attacking each other over it. I'm not sure we're building the political will that we need. I think Peter was making a very salient point that when parties agree, I think they need to learn to agree. And when everybody says we need to build up our transit system, but then they just attack each other over how, like, the nitty-gritty of how they're going to do it and what's going to go first, and then constituency politics come into play. The people who elect the right party are the ones who get it, instead of us looking at the region and what we need to do. And when we talk about all-day two-way GO service, when we talk about electrifying or not electrifying the rails, those are important conversations, but there are bigger, broader issues such as who has the rights to the rail in that corridor. If we really want to do this, we need to talk about maybe actually investing a lot of money in new tracks, in additional tracks, and that would take a lot of money. It would take a lot of time to appropriate the land, and it would take a lot of political will. And I don't think it would necessarily happen as long as parties, when they agree on a point, continue to fight over the minutia as opposed to trying to find a solution that works for everybody.
Okay, let me be the divisive one then, Ashley, and let me let me stay with you. Let me go back to my question, which is it fair for us collectively to ask people in the 905 to wait while the 416 gets its transit infrastructure built, and at the same time 905 are subsidizing us?
Well, we built a railway to create Confederation that only went through parts of the country, and that was deemed fair at the time. And I think we have to remember the fact that Toronto and the greater GTA, not just the 416, but the 416 and the 905 is still the economic engine of this province. And we like to put a lot of anger towards anything that goes to the most populous, the most economically prosperous part of not really just the province, but the country, because for whatever reason, there's a lot of resentment built up around Toronto. And when people talk about Toronto in the rest of the country, not like outside of Ontario, that includes the 905.
So that's why in our plan, we've addressed the fairness issue that you're raising, which is to separate out the $29 billion commitment for GTHA and the rest of Ontario. So it's almost an even split, right, between the two, and that's for transit and transit infrastructure. And I think that begins to address the concern people have about why am I subsidizing? But the reality is people often use the infrastructure to access different forms of transportation. But our plan is pretty clear and I think pretty fair on this point.
I want to just pick up on what Ashley said just a couple of minutes ago, and that is about transit. You know, we have political gridlock trying to deal with gridlock. She says, come on, you guys all agree on this. Let's just get things moving. Is that a fair point, Mike?
Yeah, I think that is a fair point. It is. But, you know, your original question, you know, would my constituents be behind subsidizing, you know, new subways in Toronto? Try going to a door in Enniskillen, Ontario or something and saying, you know, or a little store there and saying, by the way, we're going to, you know, the latest revenue tool, tax your parking spaces so that we can, you know, set up subways in Toronto. It's a hard sell, you know, I mean, and in a, you know, mainly rural community, it's not just a hard sell, it's an impossible sell.
All right, let me stay with, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's where our plan comes in, right? So to transcend all this arguing about, well, you broke your promise, and when you knew this was coming, and you know, people release platforms weeks after elections are called for people to consider, you know, there is that, you know, people are not opposed to paying taxes. But what we say is, you know, we're the only party that's willing to talk about doing things like congestion charges and parking taxes and things that other countries are doing to ease congestion. And people don't mind paying a little bit more, so it's something like $250 each, so that they can see their kids and families and not spend their time on the 401, right? So it's a dedicated tax, but in this present system, you can't, you know, parties are afraid to bring this up because the other parties will jump on them about taxation. And we've got this overarching thing in government from, I particularly hear it from one of the parties about the evils of taxes. And then you've got the Green Party, which is fundamentally talking about transforming the way we collect taxes so that instead of it being off of incomes where people are tight and they don't necessarily have money to want to pay for public transit, you've got income, you know, the future of income is coming from our resources, the things that Ontario has, our water and our minerals and our aggregates that are now being taxed at such a low rate that we're basically giving it away, and that taxing it just at national levels would deeply eat into our deficit and debt and start to fund the kinds of programs that Premier Wynne is talking about.
All right.
I just want to jump on one point. I think it's important when we have a discussion. I think we can come to. There's certain people that agree with the idea that we need to work together on solutions. And I know Tracy is someone that I can work with and I can talk to. But the problem is that if politics is all about making promises to get votes, and it's not about looking at being honest with the electorate and saying, listen, we're not going to do this. We are going to do that. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about jumping on broken promises, but it's fake to say I'm going to do this just to get a vote, and then when it comes to being in power, you don't do it. That ruins the trust that people have in politicians and politics. So we need to be serious about what we're going to commit to and make sure we follow through on it and take that seriously. So I take, you know, issue with having that being attacked as a point. It's important. People expect us to do what we say we're going to do. We should think about what we're going to do before we say it and then put a commitment and follow through on that commitment.
I think that's something we can all agree on, isn't
that's
it?
that's going to reinstill.
This is where the consensus is here, folks.
That's going to reinstill that trust and confidence in our political system. So we have to make sure that we're honest about what decisions we make, how we make those decisions, and make sure it's transparent and people are aware of what they're voting for, and not just giving them this treat and saying we'll give you this, and then when it comes to the implementation, it's not there. That's important. I think we need to look at that.
If any of us went to any of my constituents right now with a promise about extension of GO Transit trains into Bowmanville or the extension of completion of Highway 407 to 115, if you promise them a date now, they roll their eyes because they've heard it before.
Exactly.
That goes to your question or your statement that
But you've seen the
there's no
construction
trust.
sites, right? It's being built.
Not into Durham region, not into Durham riding. I mean,
Well,
it stops at Harmony Road.
right, but
That's not in our riding.
But Pete,
It's underway.
What's essentially missing, I believe, and the Green Party believes, is the new vision for then people to be able to have thoughtful discussions about how to arrive there, right? So if Kennedy had said we're going to put a man on the moon, it was like, well, you broke your promise about this and that, right? It's once we decide what the future of transit is, then we can have thoughtful people like the people that I'm sitting around the table with discussing ways to solve it. But they are caught up in this nasty zero-sum game where winning seems to be more important than good policy and honesty and integrity. And I want all three of these people to uplift their party and to try and lead us out of the trap that we're all in.
Okay, there is a call to action there. I want to get into another big issue in the 905. This one was raised by Jagmeet. I know you've been talking about it for a long time now. Sure. And it's the issue of auto insurance rates, and it's arguably a bigger issue in the 905 than it is elsewhere in this province. So I want to bring up a graphic. This is auto insurance rates in Canada. These are averages across the provinces, but you see there that Ontario is the highest at $1,281. Those are just averages. Jagmeet, let me begin with you, because this is a real, as you said, the people in your riding are really raising this issue. What are drivers in your riding paying for auto insurance?
So it's not uncommon for people to be paying upwards of $3,000 for auto insurance on a single car. And these are people with clean records who've never made a claim in their life, who are experienced drivers. So that's a big concern. There's a twofold concern here, and the fairness issue comes into play when we look at the history of auto insurance. The fact that in 2010, the Liberal government made a decision to cut the benefits that we receive if we're injured as drivers in Ontario. That cut of benefits resulted in an annual savings for insurance companies in the territory of $2 billion. That happened in 2010. That continued from 2011, 10 to 11, 11 to 12. So to date, they're enjoying about an $8 billion savings. On the other hand, during that time of this extraordinary savings, and you have to keep in mind, insurance companies don't only save that cost, they also reinvest that and have investment income. So they're not just saving money, they're also reinvesting that. They're enjoying some lucrative profits. During that same time period, our insurance rates actually went up while they were enjoying this historic cut to their costs. This cut was so historic that it actually cut more than just fraud. It cut legitimately injured people. So they got rid of a lot of fraudulent claims. And just to make that clear, there's very few people that actually are fraudulent claims. That's a small minority that may do a lot of claims, but it's a small minority. The average Canadian, the average Ontarian does not put forward a fraudulent claim. So in light of all this unfairness, our rates are so out of sync. The profit is soaring, but the drivers aren't seeing that savings being passed along.
All right, Tracy, let me come to you. Why are rates so high?
So there's a lot of factors that go into determining rates. Sometimes it is where you live and so on. There's been steps taken to try to get the cost down. Our government previously committed to a 15% reduction on average over the next few years, and we're underway. We have a 6% reduction to date, and a plan to achieve the balance of that by next year. But, there's issues around fraud, and as the Minister of Consumer Services, I recently introduced legislation to tighten up the rules in the towing industry, to regulate tow truck drivers and bring them under the same licensing regime as commercial vehicles. There's issues around fraud in collision repairs. So there is fraud, and I think it's a significant part of why costs have gone up, but our commitment is to help get those rates down, and we're underway. And our plan also includes more rewards over the next few years for good driving practices, like putting on snow tires in the winter. So it's high. I think I just want to talk about injured workers, though, or injured auto drivers, in that the catastrophic impairment rules did change with a with a very expert panel. So people who are truly injured, the system is still there and it works for them. But as Jagmeet says, the fraud part of it required addressing as well.
Let me come to you. How do you think the Liberals have handled this issue?
I think it's a really complex file, and I think that it's simplistic to say you can magically wave a wand and insurance rates will be down 15%, like we have been hearing. And I think it's also not as insurance companies do turn profits. Like we can't deny that, but they have different lines. And when they file their rates, the different lines are separated out. And there was a time when the auto line was suffering. They were losing money there. And this is still a major industry in our province as well. As much as we don't like paying insurance, it also employs a lot of people. And the auto side was suffering from profits because there were high rates of fraud. And we're talking about institutional fraud like health clinics overbilling, fraud like Tracy was saying at the collision repair center. So that's something where the government did start to tinker around the edges of rates and try to bring them down through the anti-fraud task force that started in 2010, and now we're actually starting to see a bit more action on it. Could they have moved a little bit more quickly? Maybe. Have some of the changes to benefit rates, who qualifies for what, been a bit too harsh? Perhaps. There are people with legitimate claims that seem to be being denied, and the thresholds seem to sometimes be a bit low, but those things can be changed. It wasn't until the NDP really put the pressure on in the 2013 budget that we did start seeing a tracking of the rates coming down in a significant way. Now, there's a combination of the anti-fraud task force and all the efforts that it put forward coming to bear, and the actual Minister of Finance saying to the regulator, we need these rates to come down, and almost forcing some of the companies to do it. But even before that 2013 budget, some of the insurers, their rates were going down because of the anti-fraud efforts.
So Pia,
Just want to jump in on
Let me go to Peter and then I'll go to
so,
you.
so again, back to nibbling at issues at the output end where people are just suggesting, slight changes. Fundamentally, there's a question in society about what things we manage privately and what things we manage publicly. And to me, insurance is one of the things that I think makes sense to manage publicly. But there's this myth that everything is more efficient and lower cost if it's privatized. And then it's like, well, let's privatize. And then once it's privatized, it's impossible to get it back to being publicly run. So you've got something like the public auto insurance, which the NDP definitely promised back in Bob Rae's times. But you've got a complex system here where now we're starting to privatize clinics, and what better way to lower auto rates than to have it be publicly insured, where it's like, look, if you're doing something fraudulently, I'm going to call you on it and it's going to lower it. But we can't continue to use a private system where there is incentive for people to take advantage of it. It's back to the zero-sum game, right? Where if there's an immediate advantage, some portion of society will take advantage of that.
I just want to point out, in Saskatchewan, my home province, where auto insurance is still public, they still have pretty high rates. They're the third highest in the country.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why a publicly run system would be any more efficient than a private run system or bring rates down. I mean, as Ashley said, it is a really complex, complex file. But a simple part of this is that just dictating that rates will go down, basically breaks all the laws of economics.
But it's working. They're down 6% on average already.
Well, and
some higher, some lower.
And a number of insurers have left the market as a result. And as soon as you start restricting the supply of anything, it puts upward pressure on the prices.
And as soon as you introduce a profit motive,
actually, one of the things is that actually there's a lot of movement into the market, because here's the reality in Ontario. This is a mandatory product. So imagine you're selling a product that everyone has to buy.
That's right.
You can't opt out of it. You have a product that everyone has to buy, and you give the people selling it free rein to do whatever they want with it. That's very difficult. So, in the wisdom, earlier in our history, the government decided that if we're making this mandatory, we also have to have an obligation to make it affordable.
Right.
That was a requirement, and I think that makes sense. Now, the reality is that by cutting the benefits that we receive, that was not an anti-fraud initiative.
Right.
It was a cost reduction initiative that was introduced by Dwight Duncan, the finance minister, back in 2010. The purpose of that, it was that we're going to cut the costs for insurance companies to bring down your rates. Now, it was a historic cost-cutting movement. They cut the costs to such an extent that in 1 year, the cost for all of Ontario in terms of statutory accident benefits went down by 50%. Imagine you're running in any industry and your major costs go down by 50%. They went down by over 70% in the GTA. But at that same time period, when they went down by such a historic amount, the rates didn't go down. And that's why I'm saying the regulation isn't waving a wand. The regulation that the government has a power, the finance ministry has a wing, which is the Financial Services Commission of Ontario. That FSCO is able to regulate the industry. Their job is to do exactly that. If they see the profits going up to such a high extent, benefits coming down, it's their job to step in and say, listen, you need to pass on those savings to drivers. And that's not a magic wand, that's the government doing its job.
But why would we have a profit motive in something like insurance for people's rates and paying things out? Doesn't it just lead to the opportunity for people to take advantage of it for profit?
Well, you're mixing two things there. I mean, the profit motive allows the industry to make a profit, which might inflate some of the costs. People can take advantage of the system, whether it was public or private. So that's two different
But
issues.
that's why the costs go up.
But there's two different issues there.
Yeah.
So you know, the argument for whether a public system is better or not, that's something we can definitely talk about.
Where does your party stand on it now? Have you switched from public insurance to now favoring private insurance?
There's no switching here. We've said this very clearly, and Andrea Horwath made this statement, and I'm very proud of this statement. She's issued a challenge to the insurance industry. She said, listen, you have an opportunity now to fix the problems. People are complaining about a number of issues. People are complaining about the fact that if you live in one area very similar to another area, your rates can sometimes be twice as high. Living in a similar GTA area, that if you can't address that, the fact that the rates are the highest in the country, if you can't address these issues, the community will ask, the people of Ontario will look for an alternative, will want an alternative. So here's a challenge to the industry to get it right. If they don't get it right, then people will ask for an alternative and will look for an alternative.
And some rates are going up and some are going down. One of your NDP colleagues just tweeted recently about his rates going down. It's fantastic. Others go up, and as you said, there's different factors that go into the equation.
Right. What we need to see, though, is an overall, because of the climate where the costs have gone down by so much, there needs to be an overall trend downwards for everybody. And it doesn't make sense that areas where people who have no claims history, perfect driving records, are seeing the rates go up. That's just unfair.
But it's surprising how many people don't shop around too, Jagmeet. Like for many of my
That's actually a good
constituents,
point.
it sounds like a very simple thing, but when I talk to my
You're right, actually, about
constituents,
that.
And
and
ultimately
then they go and shop around, they're like, yes, Tracy, I found a lower rate. So doing a bit of homework, doing a bit of research, and telling your insurer that you're doing that sometimes means they'll give you some discounts that you may have been eligible for that you didn't know about.
I think we should underline this point.
That's my consumer,
No, I
Look,
think-
consumer hat.
I
You should
know
underline that
this
point.
is an issue that is very
Sure,
near and
sure,
dear
no
to you. You've been
problem.
on the program before,
Yeah.
Tom, but we're going to move on. So other issues.
I think we have to
Public transit, we can all agree that public transit lowers the amount of people who are driving and lowers insurance costs, right?
There we go.
Okay, I want to talk about where you live, where you play, which is the 905. Many people live there because you're close to your job. For others, they're commuting further. But it's also to have a plot of land, and arguably a larger plot of land than many of us in the 416 have. But the question now is, as the 905 grows, is this still a sustainable dream, or do we need to densify? Let's start with you, Mike.
You know,
You want to give up some of your backyard?
the fact of the matter is we live in such a huge riding that people don't worry about whether or not we need more space or not. We don't need to be all crowded together out there in the countryside.
Okay, Tracy?
I don't think the 905 is a homogeneous group. I think there's different types of growth in different parts of the 905. I think people often want to live closer to where they work, and like I mentioned before, Seton will double the size of Pickering, so that's a fantastic opportunity. And you have to have the right transit infrastructure, employment lands to go with all of that. But I think people do like their plots of land in 905.
That's why many choose to live
and they
there.
know that sometimes the price you pay if you're one of the commuters going into the GTA every day. However, I think there's very urban centers within the 905 too. People can get that urban feel in a 905 riding without living in Toronto necessarily. So I think that's a very exciting development for the 905, and we'll see more of these, community hubs operate like urban centers within the 905.
Peter?
Well, I mean, beyond the fact that some people prefer to live in cities and some people prefer more rural settings, I mean, it's such a complicated issue, but basically it comes down to, what's our dream for our society, right? Like we've basically set up a tax system where Farmers in my riding have a very difficult time about whether to hold on to their farms on places that have the little prime agricultural land that we have, because they can get so much money for a subdivision to be built. And I don't blame people for wanting to make money, but it's just like the Lorax, like how much do we need? You know, and then we're building things on it that are things that are using products that are not natural and are putting things in our water, our food and air that are literally causing death amongst species. So it's time for a fundamental rethink of the way that our economy is, and that, you know, that there's not a commodification of land. And so, I mean, that's the conversation that I hope we're going to shift to having.
Okay. Actually, let me come to you, because as the 905, the massive sprawl has sort of taken hold and is growing all the time. Have the other necessary amenities, schools, hospitals, have they kept pace? Scarborough Hospital is being built, of course, but has it kept pace with the growth of the 905?
I'm not necessarily sure that the 905 was planned sufficiently as it expanded. I think it just did. It was, people wanted more suburban options around Toronto. We didn't build the transit infrastructure before they got there. I think you do, in some cases, see the government, and of all stripes, not in a political way, sometimes trying to do that along Highway 7 in Kitchener. They're preparing an area for a GO station where they're now building a subdivision, but that subdivision will be there before that GO station ever is. We can count on that, like that much is sure. But we also did have to think about, you know, where the boundary starts with our farmland, and that's why the Greenbelt was created, but it wasn't created until the problem was there, until there was so much farmland being eaten up by these subdivisions that there were starting to be questions of, are we going to be able to feed all these people if we don't start putting a line as to where the farmland has to be. I know Peel Region has some very excellent hospitals that have been on the forefront of a lot of really interesting pilot programs. That's always been my experience with Peel. I'm not as familiar with, I know Scarborough Rouge River as well has had some very interesting innovations there as well. I wouldn't know the regional, say, wait times. I know there's been a lot of pressures on schools, especially in Brampton, I know very much.
Let me come to you on that, Jagmeet. I mean, is there enough schools in your riding? Is there enough access to hospitals?
No, the development has definitely outpaced the infrastructure, for sure, and particularly in the newer parts of the riding. So in my riding, Bramley, Gore Malton, definitely in the newer developments, the development itself, like the homes being built, has far outpaced the schools and the access to resources, community centers, and hospitals. And given the fact that Brampton is such a large city now, it only has one hospital. We were promised a second, one that was not going to be demolished. It was demolished. We were promised it would be rebuilt. It's not been rebuilt yet. So we're definitely under resourced when it comes to infrastructures. But in general, just back to your original question about density, I think the reality is, given the rising cost of fuel, given the increasing gridlock, I think it's a question that we really need to sit down and discuss. How can we develop our societies and our urban or suburban areas that are more sustainable in a long-term way? And some of that's going to be about having it more dense in certain areas, for sure. And then we have to look at the discussion about areas that are very fertile that can be used for, you know, growing crops, and those areas are often used for, you know, the expansion of more homes. So that discussion also needs to definitely be looked at carefully.
Okay. Another thing, of course, it has been the big issue of this campaign is jobs.
School board merger, right?
Has been jobs. Good joke. Jobs, yes. Has the government? Let me begin with you on this one, Tracy, because it is you who's part of the government. Has the government done enough to attract jobs to the 905?
Well, I think we're on our way. I think the nature of the jobs have changed. So the manufacturing jobs, for example, of yesteryear have changed to newer age, high tech type of manufacturing jobs. And I think the educational institutions in and around the 905 are playing a really important role to make sure that students come out of Durham College or UIT, you know, with the skills for those jobs. I mean, I think 905's had a decent share of the job growth that happened last year, which is 95,000 new jobs. I think it was about 25,000 last month alone across Ontario. I think there's tremendous growth going on. But I think all the things we're talking about have to come into play at the same time. The transportation, the school systems, the housing, all that has to come into play to make sure that you know, those jobs are there. I think Our Youth Employment Fund is very important because young people are the most chronically unemployed. And I don't think that's any different in the 905. So getting young people those starts is as important, if not more important, in the 905. And that plan's working because we have 12,000 new young people under the Youth Employment Fund. And sometimes I think even in government we don't talk about the programs enough. So I think that we have a bigger job in the 905 to communicate what's out there, what can employers do, what are the incentives to get jobs going. Our Jobs and Prosperity Fund, of course, is trying to work with companies and spur economic development to create jobs that are lasting and sustainable.
Mike, Tracy says, done a pretty decent job at creating jobs in the 905. What do you think?
Well, this is an issue near and dear to my heart. I've been running a manufacturing company for 25 years, so no, the record is horrible, frankly. We've lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs since the Liberals took power. They've replaced that with 300,000 government jobs. And I see it firsthand. I've had that gut-wrenching experience of going to an employee who I know has a mortgage and kids and responsibilities and having to lay them off, mainly because of misguided government policies. And as you started this out with, jobs are the big issue right now, particularly for our young people. I have two daughters in their 20s, so I have a pretty good contact with that 20-something age group. And I had a experience a few weeks ago where I was in a pub having a beer with one of my daughter's friends. And I know he's a qualified welder. And I said, "So, are you working right now?" He goes, "No, Mike." He said, in fact, I'm pretty sure that full-time work is a thing of the past. Well, that was crushing to hear that, frankly, and it made me feel a lot better about what we're doing here and our proposals to try and create more jobs in Ontario.
But I have to ask, so with the 100,000 job reduction by your party, how is that going to affect the 905? Because they're not just central government jobs. We're talking firefighters, frontline people
We're not talking
that
frontline
deliver
people.
service.
We are not talking frontline
important.
people. It's very clear we've been misrepresented very badly on that. What we have said is that we'll reduce the size of government by 100,000 people over 4 years. 50 to 90,000 government people retire every year at all levels of government. A large part of that will be attrition, and we've said we will not be cutting at the front lines. We're looking at the bloated bureaucracies.
Those are still jobs, though.
No firefighters?
There would be cuts to educational assistance in the education.
That's right.
That is
I just had a
frontline worker.
conversation the other day with a school board trustee at the Kawartha Pine Ridge School Board, which is the big one in our riding, and they employ 3,000 teachers. And they, in anticipation of the election, did the math on their school board, and the net effect of the adding a couple of students to each classroom and the reductions and the reduction in the number of kids in all-day kindergarten, the net effect on those 3,000 teachers is 29 positions, and that was from a school board trustee. They retire 100 to 150 teachers a year in that school board. So there's, in my view, and looking at the numbers, nobody on the front lines of any service has anything to fear from a PC government.
But Mike, it sounds too good to be true. Like, I wish you would lead with a little bit of even just healthy skepticism about what could go wrong. Like, this is a huge thing. It's not like somebody in Ontario has created hold on a sec, created 1 million jobs before. And, your leader seems to have gotten inspiration from it from the US Republicans and the Tea Party, with sort of a work to right mentality of employing people at wages that can't support them, so that the rest of society needs to cover multiple ways to support them, and then government seems bad because it can't take care of everyone, as opposed to, considering what we're talking about, which is shifting taxes off of incomes for a business and for others, and onto the resources that we're giving away to fundamentally create a new economy so that we can have future jobs that aren't in the service industry at non-living wages.
All right, well, you covered a lot of ground there.
But what are you skeptical about the program?
I'm not skeptical at all. When I look at the 10 measures that we have put in place or we're proposing in order to create jobs, they're all very reasonable. Every one of them is. And we're talking 1 million jobs over 8 years. That's 125,000 jobs a year. That is a doable. We've done it before. That's not a absurd number at all.
Notwithstanding the math issues with the 1 million jobs, I think people in the 905 and beyond are very concerned about the 100,000, because if you fire 100,000
we're not going to fire 100,000 people.
Well, however you do
June
it.
13th is not Pink Slip Day in Ontario.
Well, I'm not sure you're guaranteeing there won't be pink slips, but whenever that happens, you don't just affect that person, you affect everyone in that household.
I understand
you affect purchasing power. It's, I think, a very dangerous proposition that could set us back tremendously. And people in the 905, that's what I'm hearing at the door. You asked about what are people talking about at the door.
Every time I've
that's what
explained
they're
this,
talking about. And they don't believe it.
Every
they just
time
simply
I
don't
have
believe
explained
it.
this to people at the door, as I just did to everybody and your viewers, they came away saying, why didn't they say that in the first place? Well, we did say it in the first place. We couldn't get it through the blizzard of negative advertising coming from certain vested interests.
Okay, I want to come to Jagmeet on the jobs question, then we're going to move on.
Sure.
How is it playing out in your riding? Are there specific issues in your riding when it comes to jobs?
Well, certainly one of the things is we suffered a big loss. We lost a big company. Unilever left the Bramley portion of my riding. One of the things that we've looked at is that there's, if you do the same thing in the past and it, hasn't worked, why do it again? So we know that both the Liberals and the PCs are looking at, cutting corporate tax rates. We saw the Liberals do that already during the time period where we lost a lot of jobs. And we're seeing the Conservatives talking about doing it again. Let's cut the corporate tax rates more. The Liberals also have a plan to give away billions of dollars. We're saying, listen, let's try something different, something that's actually tried and tested. A job creation tax credit, an incentive that if a company, we can't create jobs, but we can encourage the climate for jobs. Mm-hmm. So if a company wants to hire new people, if a company wants to expand and build a new factory, if a company needs to retrain its employees, we'll give them an incentive to do that. That's a strings attached way of giving money for an incentive. I mean, giving money for results. So we want jobs, let's encourage companies to create jobs by giving them that incentive. If we want more factories, let's encourage them by giving them a manufacturing tax credit. Those are targeted tax reliefs and targeted money with an actual goal in mind. That to me makes a lot of sense, and that's a strategy that we're looking at.
Anyway,
okay, I'm just going to hold us up because we have less than 5 minutes left, and I do want to get to this because we're a week and a day away from voting day.
Sure.
I want to talk about voter turnout in the last election in 2011 because of the 10 ridings with the lowest turnout, 8 were in the 905. So let's bring up some of those numbers. There's Mississauga, Brampton South at 36.4, then Brampton West at 38.3, and then a number of others sort of hovering around in the 40.7, including Bramley, Gore, Malton at 40.7. Jagmeet, that is your riding there. So you want to get in here, I know. I mean, it's not the kind of list you want to make, Jagmeet. I mean, the overall turnout last election was 48.2%, and you were sitting at, not you, but the people in your riding came out at 40.7%. Why was that?
You know what? One of the things we noticed, though, we increased the turnout because if you look at our, historic, the NDP didn't receive much in terms of votes before. Historically, in my riding, I'm the first NDP to ever win that seat in the history of Canada. What we did is we mobilized a lot of young people. We mobilized a lot of students. We mobilized a lot of women who were very kind of excluded from politics. We engaged people that were not normally political, and we noticed an increase of first-time voters, of youth voting. And for us, there was a whole new segment of the population that came in to vote. So though the numbers show a low turnout, overall, we actually increased the turnout in the voters in other parts of our community, and we're very proud of that. One of the biggest things, and I mentioned this already in this discussion, is that when politicians don't follow through on their commitments, you break the trust of the citizens. And if you don't follow through on commitments, what happens is people become more and more apathetic, and they don't go out to vote. So one of the things we can do is make sure that we're honest and straightforward about what we're going to do, only promise as much as we can achieve, and follow through on our commitments. And I'm hoping that people have seen that level of commitment in our riding and with our party and the things that we fought for, and we're hoping that'll encourage more people to come out and vote.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I want someone to explain, but why is it low in the 905?
So maybe a practical answer, going back to our transportation gridlock challenge, let me just suggest that getting home to vote is really hard for people. They have to, get back to home, they have to feed the family, they got to a soccer practice and so on. That could be an issue. So at some point we need a discussion about more modern and different ways to be able to exercise your democratic right. My riding was pretty much on par with voter turnout, but I have that Scarborough side that maybe maybe boosted it up. But I think getting home and getting out to vote is a huge practical issue.
Okay, I want to thank you all because this was a very thoughtful discussion. We stayed really focused on the 905. And I want to end by asking Ashley, in the grand context of Ontario come next week, how important is the 905 region to the outcome of June 12th?
I think it's crucial. Those numbers you started off the top with, there are 25 seats in the 905. 14 of them are currently Liberal, 10 of them are currently PC, one of them is held by a New Democrat. If we want to see if there's going to be a change of government, the 905 definitely has to be part of that. There are 107 ridings, that's almost a quarter of them. If you combine the 905 with the 416, it's a total of 47 of 107 ridings. Currently, the Liberals hold 31 of them. So unless we see some of those 31 seats all swing towards one party, then it could be a very interesting makeup of the next parliament. So I think the battle for the next government is in the combined 416, 905, but the battle for a majority or minority then starts to branch out beyond that.
I want to thank you all. Good luck on the last week on the hustings. Thank you, Ashley. You won't be on the hustings, but you'll be covering the hustings. Thank you very much.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.